Dr. Bessel, and welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
So I said to you early on that the book is a book that most lay people may not think to pick up, but it is critical if you want to understand trauma. So I want to start with trauma. Is trauma objective, or is there a definition about what trauma is?
Well, trauma is something that overwhelms your capacity to cope. It is like, oh my God, it's really something that leaves you literally speechless, and your brain and your mind can no longer deal with it. When you get beaten up by somebody big, you go like, please don't hit me. But that sense of helplessness, and this is it, is sort of a very core issue about trauma.
Mm-hmm. And so I said earlier, is it objective? But I meant, is it subjective? I mean, how do we quantify if I've gone through a situation that I consider traumatic?
Well, it depends on all sorts of things. It depends on how old you are. Depends on what is happening to you. For example, if somebody is my mom and I feel that my mom is able to handle things, I may feel completely overwhelmed as a kid. But as long as I think, oh, my mom will take care of it, or this politician will take care of it, or my boss will take care of it, you can sort of let go, hoping that somebody else will do it. And so also, to some degree, you can prepare yourself. Of course, in the military, people go through basic training and are continuously pushed to the edge. And so they're really prepared to deal with stuff that for the most of us would be unbearable. Same thing in medical school. So I'm an intern, and a kid gets brought in with burns all over its body. If an ordinary person would see that, they would freak out and go like, oh my God. But as a young doctor, you're prepared for it, and you're being taught, you do that, you do that, you do that. And so you can, to some degree, prepare yourself by having people around you who can help you, and also by being prepared with knowledge and expertise.
Now, in the book, Dr. Bessel, you write that once you started treating as a psychiatrist, a veteran, you knew that you had to really flesh out trauma.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, it really was a moment of truth. This guy comes in, a lawyer, been in Vietnam, and he has terrible nightmares. Had worked in a sleep laboratory, so I'd sort of had an interest in nightmares. They say, oh, don't worry about it. I'll give you the right medication. And he came back a few weeks later, and I said, so how was it? Expecting him to be grateful for what a wonderful doc I was. And he said, I didn't take your medicines. And I said, why not? And he said, because I need to be a living memorial to my friends who died in Vietnam. And even as I say that, I'm almost become tearful. I was just blown away by it, that this man had to. There was something in him that felt so loyal to the people who he had lost, that he had to live in memory of them. And I had been trained as a neurobiologist, neuroscientist, pharmacologist, and I always thought, oh, it's a little brain thing. And then the element of loyalty and love and belonging became a very central element. And I was really blown away that we cannot reduce it to simple chemicals or simple circuits, because the human element of loyalty and belonging is such an important part of who we are.
Mm-hmm. But that moment changed the trajectory of how you would perceive trauma and how you would treat trauma.
Well, it made me very curious. What also made me curious is that this young fellow was telling me how his dad had been a soldier in Patton's army in 1944 at the Battle of the Bulge, and his father always put him down and said, you will never be as good as my friends who I lost in the war. And I go, oh my God, here we are 40 years later, and his son is going through exactly the same experience, and now he won't be there for his kids because his internal orientation will be towards his dead friends, just like his dad was. And so I became very curious about how these things get transmitted from generation to generation and the deep psychological and biological impact it has on people. And I've always been interested in science and precision, but I also am interested in literature and art. And this is really where it all came together about the complexity of what it's like to be a human being and how people survive. Became very central, yeah.
After you have this encounter with this veteran who was very successful, what then do you do to help people without medicine?
Well, at that point I was still very much a psychopharmacologist, so I did try medicines, and I did some study of medicines at the time. But the first thing I did is to really take an inventory about what had happened to people, what they thought were the most damaging things in the war, what had sustained them, what they were like before. And so the first thing I did was really sort of get a lay of the land, which hadn't been done at that point yet. Nobody knew anything about veterans. In fact, what was so stunning in retrospect is that I was at the VA at the time, and the VA didn't have a single book in the library about war trauma or war neurosis or shell shock. It was completely didn't exist. Mm-hmm. And then later on, as we started to talk about soldiers, it became obvious that soldiers are just a very small segment of the traumatized population, and that the biggest issue is women and children, and men also, of course. And that up to that point, nobody had talked about domestic violence, nobody had talked about child abuse. It was not on our map, which in retrospect is just stunning. How this is like 1980 about, huh? And that nobody had ever talked about these things. And then it turns out later that people had talked about these things, but the people who had tended to be shoved aside. Because when the trauma was over, the trauma of a war, people wanted to go on with their lives and didn't want to keep talking about it. And so the issue of that trauma is ubiquitous, it's everywhere, but people also don't really want to face it. And people themselves don't want to face it either, because people themselves want to go on with their lives and want to push it away.
Right. So how do we begin to understand those traumas, especially when you start to talk about small children who are unable to articulate their trauma?
Well, small children are unable to articulate the trauma, but adults also are. That it's the nature of trauma is that you get so overwhelmed that you literally are speechless. And actually, so we did the first brain scan of traumatized people reliving their trauma. And much to my astonishment, what got knocked out in the brain is the speech center. And what got activated is sort of the body arousal system. And so the trauma lives on in your body as physical sensations and as emotions, but not so much as a story about the past. So people get triggered by something and become terribly upset. And they don't know what they get so upset about, because the event actually may have been gone into the mist of history, but the body's reactions continue. And so people suddenly become angry, suddenly upset, become frozen, and there is oftentimes no language.
And so how do we help people? Because I always thought, before reading this book, especially with small children, and as you said, anybody that doesn't have the words, because the words go mute, so to speak, they go away. Right. But I always thought that if you loved a person enough, or you put them in a safe environment, that trauma would somehow be wiped away. But in the book you say not so. Talk about why.
Well, caring and being kind and gentle and accepting is terribly important. But for example, if you have been molested, somebody who smiles at you may trigger a feeling of, when people smile at you, they're about to hit you. That may be sort of a deep reaction, and so it may actually be scary when people are nice to you, because you may interpret that on some level as the silence before the storm. And so what happens when you get traumatized is that the alarm system, the survival part of your brain, becomes hyperactive, and you get most of all focused on something terrible is going to happen to me, so you're on guard all the time. And you are always ready to be pounded upon or to shut yourself down, basically. And the hard thing is, and you must deal with that in the situation that you're in, is that you miss a lot. Because when you get preoccupied with survival, there isn't room for playing and studying and learning, because you're too involved in just trying to survive. But this issue of feeling physically safe is terribly important. But that is literally feeling physically safe. And so what was interesting to me is that I worked with some people who do martial arts with traumatized kids. And martial arts really helped them to feel safer in their bodies. And they felt more competent. And I got into theater, and when people play certain roles in the theater, they get to feel on a physical level, oh, that is what it feels like to be a mighty king, or it feels like to be a competent person. I didn't know what that felt like. So understanding is not enough. You need to actually have a physical experience of how things can be different.
And I want to back it up even further than that, because you talk about even a fetus experiencing trauma in the womb before they even make it into the world.
See, I don't go there.
Okay.
I know people who go there, but I've seen so much stuff after the womb. I don't need to go back there.
Okay.
Before the time. But these early years, so when you adopt a kid out of foster care, your brain is...
I want to go back to your point about sensory processing, especially in children. And I talked about the pediatric therapy center that we have right here in central Louisiana that's doing amazing work. And oftentimes kids are having behavioral problems at school and at home. And we think it's about defiance. We think it's about a lot of other things, but it may not be. What do we need to know about sensory processing and how it affects children?
Well, I would say it's good to be able to see that, oh, this kid has a hard time drawing, or this kid has a hard time with hand-eye coordination. But to my mind, if a kid is behaviorally out of control, you try a number of things. And the issue, accidentally, we discovered this, the issue of balancing yourself is very important. So being able to walk on a balance beam, being able to sit on a swing and to move back and forth happens to repair something in the way back in your brain having to do with balance. And then much to our amazement, what happened if that part of the brain got activated, the kids started to be able to think about the future and to think about other alternatives. We did not know that. So this is very much work in progress, and my sense is we need to be very modest in what we claim and to be very open to try a variety of different things. So sensory processing happened to work very well for a number of kids we worked with, and for a number of kids it didn't work. And so it's very important for us to be open. And of course, our medical system is not a system that's very open. The insurance companies will tell you, you can do that and you cannot do that. And that is really holding back a lot of progress. And it makes it very hard for people who are not very well off, who can explore a number of things and pay for it. It is very hard right now to get good treatment, because it's so controlled by insurance companies and by people who actually are not very well trained in this stuff.
Even those doctors who see a child who is having challenges in school, and most of the time they want to do what you did with the veteran. They want to give them some sort of medicine. Talk about why that could be problematic.
Oh, it's a national disaster, actually. I wish that our current president would listen to the podcast, in that the poorer you are, the more likely you get to get medications that will make you more tractable. But these medications are dangerous medications because they interfere with learning and with playing. And so if a kid has a pain in the neck, you can give them medication so they won't be blowing up anymore. But the price you pay for shutting them down is that they will be unable to learn. So it's very important to really see what can help this child to feel calmer and safer and to organize themselves and not primarily use medications.
And that's just the opposite of what we're doing, because now teachers are saying, I can't teach in the classroom because this child is disruptive. And then you have parents that are looking for the answer, and most of the time it is give them Ritalin or give them something that will help them to learn, or my child is failing, help
Right.
them to learn.
But maybe the school is the problem. Maybe expecting 6-year-olds to sit still for an hour or 2 hours
Right.
doesn't make any sense. And what happens in school systems, particularly again if you're poor, is that the first thing that gets abolished is music, theater, athletics, and playground. And those are the most important things that a kid needs in order to develop their brain. If a kid feels safe and a kid feels accepted and has friends, kids become curious and they will learn. But you cannot force that to kids and just to give them a drug and say, now you go sit still and learn. It doesn't work that way. The job of children is to learn how to play and to imagine things and to feel their bodies. And so it's the kid. The problem may not be the kid. The problem may be the school system.
And so this book is packed with research and experts. But what I'm thinking now, are there not enough experts, psychologists, psychiatrists who treat these cases and who treat trauma to really understand it so that the treatment plan works, so that the body that has held all this trauma can begin to release it? How do we speak to that?
Well, we set up a network 20 years ago through Congress, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, which it would be worth consulting with, now consists of about 150 sites around the country that work with kids and study kids and implement what we know about trauma in children. So it's accessible, but you need to look for it. You need to really go. That's, again, why I wrote the book. And the next person you may want to interview is Oprah, because next week Oprah is about to come out with a book about trauma, because she has her own background. And certainly my book is not the only resource. And she will talk about how important these things are also. So it is out there, but you need to look for it. And so you have this nice program in your neighborhood, and here and there you find these programs that get it.
Mm-hmm. And so with that said, as I was reading the book, I think like any parent or any person who's dealing with somebody with trauma, we want to know that there is hope, that a person can get past. And you talk about being able to create solutions that help you to move past the trauma. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, so we have been on a journey of discovery. And so we learned that you can help people with their traumatic memories by doing something called EMDR, eye movement reprocessing, and that's fairly widely available, can be very helpful for you to deal with specific traumatic incidents. We learned that you can reset the brain by playing computer games with your own brain and sort of reinforce patterns in your brain that make you feel calmer and more focused. And so you can play computer games with your own brain. It's a process I'm very involved in. But playing, singing together, moving together, dancing together, being physically in sync with other people. A very important part of being traumatized is you're out of sync with your environment. Somebody is beating you up. You try to hide, but that person is out of sync with you. Basically, what gives people a sense of pleasure and safety is being in sync with other people. So moving together with other people, singing with other people, performing with other people, doing things that are in tune and in rhythm with people around you is very good for the soul, the brain, and the mind.
Wow. I want to talk about the trauma that Black people are experiencing in America, most especially Black men being stopped by policemen and the real trauma that lies there.
You wanted to talk about the dilemma of being a black man in America, and I think it's a very important topic that we really should talk about. Of course, I am not a black man, and I'm quite privileged compared to many people, but the issue of being always looked at suspiciously, to always be seen as you're a dangerous person, I need to protect myself against you, of course, is a terrible burden to carry for people around you, and might very well also lead to people feeling that, okay, you think I'm a bad guy, I may as well be a bad guy. And so to live up to people's expectations. And if you don't have a lot of role models of people who are able to make it, it becomes very hard to make it for yourself. And then, of course, there's this horrendous issue of the legacy of slavery that's actually continuing on so many different levels, where people you always live with the fear somebody is going to hurt me, somebody is going to hit me, somebody is going to run me off the sidewalk, I'm going to be humiliated. How do you keep a sense of self-esteem if people treat you always as being inferior or not good enough, or if people don't value you for who you are? And I think that it's a huge issue. It's interesting that I'm quite involved in a number of programs in prisons, and they're very interesting programs. That I'm involved in a program called Shakespeare in the Prison, where people learn how to become actors and they really play a role and to come into their bodies. I'm involved in another program where men are taught how to dance the hula. Very close to my heart, actually. I love the hula. And you learn how to move together and to get a sense of pleasure and belonging in your body. And that issue of pleasure and belonging is so important, that feeling of we are in this together. I have a friend, Issei Barnwell, who was a singer in Sweet Honey in the Rock, who says that slaves survived slavery through singing together. The singing of the chain gangs, the singing of the Baptist churches, and moving together, singing with people is the one thing that gave them a sense of belonging and pleasure and internal peace together. There's some lessons to be learned. Maybe that's really what we should be doing. We should move together and we should dance together and sing together and get that sense of calmness and belonging in our bodies.
And so we're just off the heels of the George Floyd verdict, where people feel like maybe there is a little bit of validation, but Black men in particular are still expressing that they don't feel safe in America. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with that trauma, that trauma in many cases that has not yet happened?
Well, of course, what happened with George Floyd, the verdict, you go like, well, one guy got justice, but there's millions of other people who didn't get justice. And I think you start off by creating opportunities for people to really get a sense of dignity and a sense of the whole issue of minimum wage. It's a huge issue. If you work 2 jobs and you can still not pay your rent, how are you going to feel good about yourself? How do you feel good about supporting your family if you live in a society where you basically, even if you work your ass off, that you cannot take care of people? So I think social conditions are terribly important. And also being able to speak your truth and to really say what it feels like and what it's like, and how do we protect ourselves, how do we make ourselves feel safe. Terribly important. What makes you feel good? What you ask a kid is, what do you like? What gives you a sense of pleasure? Really getting an internal sense of competence, of I can do something that's important and useful.
With the book, there's so much research, so much information. Do you feel that people who have been traumatized by rape, people who have been traumatized because they watched somebody being murdered right before their eyes, children who have been molested, do you think that there is a way out for
Yes,
them to have a normal life?
you know, that's been the journey of discovery, and that's why it's so gratifying. Is that how oftentimes things that you don't think will work. For example, what I mentioned earlier, the EMDR, the eye movement therapy, is incredibly helpful for if you have seen somebody, some horrendous scene, which of course many people have, and you can't get it out of your mind. And it becomes sort of your lodestar that is always there. And you can actually help people to let that image go and to say, yes, it happened. It was really terrible, but it happened in December 2016. It's not happening right now. Yes, we are able to move these things along so that people can come into the present and become relatively calm and safe.
And one of the things that you talk about too is breathing, and there are practices to coming into the present and allowing the body to release the trauma and the pain of whatever it's experienced.
Right. So our greatest comfort in life is touch. But when you have been molested, touch may become very dangerous. And so learning what it feels like to be touched is an important thing to gain. And so I did the first federally funded study in yoga for PTSD. And it turned out that yoga was a better treatment than any medication that people had ever studied. And that learning to live in your body and to feel your body and to calm your body down is a very important part of the healing process.
Mm-hmm. What surprises you on this journey, Dr. Bessel, as you've done all this research, you've spoken with all of these scientists, and on its face, like when you read the book and we're having this conversation right now, you're thinking about how can breathing help? How can movement help? Because that's what I was thinking when we started putting our little boys in therapy. I'm like, how does play help?
Yeah.
But it does. What surprises you about what you're finding out does help trauma?
Well, what surprises me, first of all, is how many people I've met who have had the most horrendous experiences and somehow are able to create something. That people are amazingly creative creatures. And some people, even despite the fact that horrible things happen to them, find a way. That doesn't mean that, we should all be like that. No, but it shows you how incredibly persistent people are in trying to find a life for themselves. And so when you deal with trauma, you really meet the life force and you meet people who really try so hard to do well. And what we find is that if people find a community and who find a capacity to make their bodies in sync with other people, that by and large they do very well. And then there's all these incidental discoveries. You can, to some degree, rewire your brain by doing neurofeedback. You can probably rewire your attention to other people by things like tango dancing. You can restore a sense of pleasure and safety by singing with other people. And also, what is terribly important is for people to have an opportunity to find the words for who they are. To say, this is what I feel, this is what I know, and this is what happened to me. And to really be allowed to find a language for themselves and find somebody else who takes a deep interest in them and say, tell me more. what is that like for you? We need to have a verbal presence of who we are also.
And in the book, you write about finding your agency, and I think for a lot of people who've been traumatized, of course, they lose who they are.
They lose who they are, right? And they become passive. Huh? And they watch TV and they do things that everybody else does. And they blast themselves with noise to sort of calm that spirit down. And you need to really learn to meet yourself and to encounter yourself and to spend time with yourself.
Wow, powerful. The book is entitled The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. Dr. Bessel Van Der Kolk has been our guest. Before you got to go, give people your website. And I mean, you got so many great resources that people can connect to.
So, two websites. One is www.besselvanderkolk.com, my personal website, and the other one is my organization, the Trauma Research Foundation, www.traumaresearchfoundation.org.
There you go. Dr. Bessel, we hope that you'll come back because there's so much more to talk about.
Good.
Thank you so much. Indeed. Hey, everybody, stay on point. We're back after this.